In this video, we'll show you why the S&P 500 is not as diversified as you think. Let's jump into today's video.
The S&P 500 is not diversified like you think. If Apple or Microsoft drops 20%, your S&P 500 portfolio falls far more than most people realize. Because here's the thing. Most people think buying the S&P 500 means equal exposure to 500 companies. It doesn't. A small group of stocks dominate your returns and your risk. In this video, we're breaking down how the S&P 500 actually works, why concentration matters more than most investors think, and what smarter alternatives look like if you want genuine diversification. Let's start with the misconception. When people hear S&P 500, they picture a portfolio spread evenly across 500 of America's biggest companies. And that makes sense. The name itself suggests balance. 500 companies, broad exposure, real diversification. So if one company struggles, it's only 1/500th of your portfolio, right? Wrong. The S&P 500 doesn't work that way. And this misunderstanding causes investors to take on concentration risk without even realizing it. It's not the index's fault. It's just that most people don't understand how it's actually constructed. Here's how the S&P 500 actually works. The S&P 500 is market cap weighted. That means the bigger a company's market value, the more influence it has over your portfolio.
Think of it like voting power. If you have 500 people in a room, but 10 of them control 30% of the votes, those 10 people dominate every decision, even though there are 490 others in the room. That's exactly how the S&P 500 works. Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, these companies are massive. They're worth trillions of dollars combined. And because the index is cap-weighted, they represent a huge chunk of the S&P 500. Right now, the top 10 companies make up roughly 30% to 35% of the entire index. The top 50 companies, about 60%. That means the other 450 companies, the majority of the index, only account for about 40% of your portfolio. So when you buy the S&P 500, you're not getting equal exposure to 500 companies, you're getting heavy exposure to a small group of mega-cap tech stocks and lighter exposure to everything else. Let's make this concrete. If Apple makes up 7% of the S&P 500 and it drops 20%, that's a 1.4% drag on your entire portfolio just from one company. If the top 5 companies all drop 15% together, your S&P 500 could fall 5% to 6% before you even account for what's happening with the other 495 companies. And this isn't a hypothetical, this has happened. In 2022, the mega-cap tech stocks led the market down, and because they dominated the index, the S&P 500 fell harder than many investors expected. Now, concentration isn't inherently bad.
But it is a risk choice, and most investors don't realize they're making that choice. They think they're buying diversification. What they're actually buying is a bet on the continued dominance of America's largest companies. Let's be clear, the cap-weighted S&P 500 has performed incredibly well over the past decade. Why? Because the mega-cap tech companies that dominate the index have been absolute juggernauts. Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, these companies have delivered extraordinary growth. And because the S&P 500 is cap-weighted, it gave you maximum exposure to the winners. As they grew, they took up more of the index. Your portfolio rode that wave. So, this isn't a criticism of the S&P 500, it's done exactly what it was designed to do, reflect the market value of America's largest companies. But here's the question, will the next decade look like the last one? Will the same companies that dominated the 2010s and early 2020s continue to dominate? Or will leadership rotate to different sectors, different companies, different parts of the market? Nobody knows. And that's exactly why concentration risk matters.
The risk isn't that the S&P 500 will crash. The risk is that the small group of companies driving its returns could underperform while the rest of the market does fine. This is called leadership rotation. It happens all the time. In the 2000s, the largest companies were energy and financial stocks. Today, they're mostly tech. The leaders change, the market evolves. What worked in one decade doesn't always work in the next. And when markets are narrow, meaning just a handful of stocks are driving all the gains, your returns become heavily dependent on those few names staying strong. If they stumble, the index stumbles. even if the other 450 companies are doing well. That's concentration risk, and it's the risk most S&P 500 investors don't realize they're taking. Alternative approach 1, equal-weighted S&P 500. So, what's the alternative? One option is the equal-weighted S&P 500.
This version holds the same 500 companies, but instead of weighting them by market cap, it gives each company equal influence. Apple gets the same weight as a much smaller company. Microsoft gets the same weight as a regional bank. This approach dramatically reduces your dependence on mega-cap stocks. It spreads your risk more evenly across all 500 companies. The trade-off? Higher fees. Equal-weighted ETFs cost a bit more to maintain because they have to rebalance more frequently. And historically, equal-weighted versions have been more volatile. They've also underperformed the cap-weighted S&P 500 in recent years, precisely because mega-cap tech has been so dominant. But if you believe leadership will rotate, or if you just want less concentration risk, equal weighting is worth considering. It's not better or worse, it's just different, and it depends on what kind of risk you want to take. Over the past 20 years, 2005 to 2025, the market cap-weighted S&P 500 has delivered a total return CAGR of approximately 10.5%, turning a €10,000 investment into roughly €79,000. The equal-weighted S&P 500 has delivered a CAGR of approximately 9.2%, turning €10,000 into roughly €62,000. That's approximately a €17,000 difference in ending value. Cap weighting has still outperformed over this period.
Why? Mega cap tech dominance. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Nvidia drove outsized returns in the 2010s and early 2020s. Cap weighting gave maximum exposure to these winners. Equal weighting spread risk more evenly, but captured less upside. How to buy on DEGIRO. If you want to invest in the cap-weighted approach, look for the iShares Core S&P 500 UCTF with the ticker CSPX. It's accumulating, trades in US dollars, and you can buy it on exchanges like Xetra or Euronext Amsterdam through DEGIRO. For the equal-weighted approach, you want the iShares S&P 500 Equal Weight UCTF, ticker EWSP. Again, it's accumulating, trades in dollars, and is available on Xetra through DEGIRO. Both are UCTS compliant, so they work for European and Irish investors, and both are on DEGIRO's commission-free core selection, which means you can buy them without paying transaction fees once per month. Cap weighting suits investors comfortable with mega-cap concentration and seeking maximum historical returns. Equal weighting suits those wanting broader exposure across all 500 companies with less dependence on a handful of giants, accepting slightly lower long-term returns and higher volatility. Alternative approach number 2. Broader diversification. Another approach is to go beyond the S&P 500 entirely and build genuine global diversification. Instead of just owning the largest 500 US companies, you own thousands of companies across the US, Europe, Asia, emerging markets, the whole world. ETFs like the MSCI World or FTSE All World give you exposure to over 3,000 companies globally.
Your portfolio isn't dependent on the US market. It's not dependent on mega-cap tech. It's spread across countries, sectors, and company sizes. This is true diversification. You can also use a core satellite approach. Keep the S&P 500 as your core holding, but add smaller allocations to international equities, small caps, or equal-weighted funds to reduce concentration. The goal isn't to abandon the S&P 500. The goal is to understand what you actually own and then decide if you want to adjust. So who should use which approach? The cap-weighted S&P 500 is for people who want simplicity, low fees, and are comfortable with concentration in mega-cap stocks. If you believe the largest companies will continue to lead, this is the most efficient way to capture that. The equal-weighted S&P 500 is for people who want exposure to all 500 companies more evenly and who are willing to accept slightly higher fees and volatility in exchange for less concentration risk.
Broader global diversification is for people who want genuine diversification across countries and sectors and who don't want to be entirely dependent on the performance of US mega-cap tech. There's no right answer. It depends on your risk tolerance, your time horizon, and what you believe about the future. But the key is this: you need to understand what you actually own before you can make an informed decision. The S&P 500 isn't the problem. Not understanding what you actually own is. It's not a bad index. It's done exactly what it was designed to do, but it's not as diversified as most people think. A small number of very large companies dominate your returns and your risk. That concentration has worked brilliantly in recent years, but it's still concentration.
If you're comfortable with that, great. Keep the S&P 500 as your core holding. But if you want less dependence on mega-cap tech, or if you want genuine diversification, consider equal weighting or global equities. The smartest investors aren't the ones who pick the best index. They're the ones who understand what they own and why. So here's my question for you. Are you invested in the cap-weighted S&P 500, equal-weighted, or something else entirely? Drop a comment and let me know. I'd love to hear what approach you're using and why. And if this video changed how you think about the S&P 500, hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find this kind of content. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.